Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. I've always said accidents happen. It's just the way of the world. It's the effect you have to worry about. If accidents just happen, then they're not going to be avoided, are they? They just come along and haunt us every now and again. But it's the consequences that are often the problem. Now, yesterday I was filming on the table and I moved that fan out of the way in there. And I obviously stretched the wire. Don't worry, it's all turned off. It's turned off now because I've just noticed it now. But that's my little thermostat, and that wire's become disconnected. Guess where it goes? It goes to my heater, which meant yesterday night had no heating. And I dread to think of the consequences. Luckily it wasn't a cold night, a relatively mild spell. Well, at least till the end of today, but well, that's the highest since I reset it, 23 degrees. Okay, we got down to just under 11 degrees last night. Now, bearing in mind my minimum is set at 12 degrees, that definitely isn't the end of the world. That could have been quite bad. If we'd had a really cold night, you know, down at freezing, then this place would have dropped down to probably 4 or 5 degrees overnight, and some plants might have suffered. So I've got away with it, but only just, and I'll fix it in a minute. I don't need to fix it until we go into this evening, obviously, but it needs doing. Yeah, accidents happen. Keep your eye on your kit. Make sure it's all working all the time, especially essentials. You know, I mean, at the moment my humidifier is turned off. I only turn it on manually on rare occasions when we get a bright sunny day and the temperature starts to climb a bit. But otherwise I don't need extra humidity in here. You know, it's currently set at 78%. That's almost too high. But that's just the way it goes. But that will drop down during the day simply because the door to the lounge is open. And the air from the lounge will filter in here, you know, just as it balances itself. That warms it up a bit out here for the daytime. Makes it more comfortable for me because it's currently just under 18 degrees C. But it will also drop the humidity because the air in the lounge is dry, you know, central heating and all that stuff. So I got away with it. It could have been a lot worse. Now what I'm going to do today is look at some of the mounts. I've got to water the mounts today, not the resting ones. They had a trickle not too long ago. They won't need any for a while now. But as I've got to get them down to water them, I'll have a look at some of them. And I'll try and pick on ones we haven't sort of looked at for a while. So not the Tolumnias, we had quite a good look at those not long ago, and also some of the others, but we'll have a look at some that don't get looked at very often because they're just not doing much, well, things like that. We'll start with this row along here. This is the easiest things to get at in the world, but what we've got here is Arengus fastuosa, and we've got 2 spikes on there pushing on slowly but surely, yeah, coming along. What we've got is effectively 2 plants there. We've got the central plant that's currently got the spikes on, and then to the left is what was a tiny little plantlet once that's now grown on, and probably next year that could reach blooming size, which gives me more options for spikes, obviously. But it's attached, you know, it's effectively one plant with 2 leads, if you can think of it like that. So that's that one. This is one of my Neoplata that's not doing well, but it's doing a lot better than it was. It was potted in moss and started to get some rot at the base, and once I noticed it, we did a kitchen session and unpotted it, and it fell apart. The rhizome had not far off disintegrated, so all I could do was rescue some pieces. And I decided to mount them on the grounds that the time of year involved was coming into winter, I believe, and these need to stay quite dry and cool in the winter. And a way of doing that is to put it on a mount with some moss so that when I water it, it hydrates thoroughly because the moss stays wet for around a day, but it's then dry the next day, so it can have that dry cycle, which suits these better in the winter time. But there are some new fans showing. That bottom one on the left has a little tiny new fan coming. The centre was effectively 3, although 2 of them are joined, I think. There's a little new fan there. And the top group have actually got several new fans starting at the base. They're all attached, those plants. They're not separate, so that's like a single piece. So it's coming on. I don't expect it to do much at all until we get the better weather. You know, the longer days, some better temperatures, and I can up the feed and watering. These are my Loddigesii kikis that I separated. They're doing absolutely nothing, as expected. It's their rest period. I'd love to have kept them growing through the winter and on into, you know, the next growing season, but they decided to stop growing, and if that happens, there's not a lot you can do about it. So even though they're kikis, they're getting a form of rest, because I'm watering my mounts roughly every 3 days at the moment, and they get missed every other run. So they're getting watered about once a week. But that's just to, you know, they're small plants. They haven't got a lot of strength or energy in them, and I don't want them staying dry too long. So that's that one. This one was in bloom not that long ago, and I was reliably told not to take the spike off because occasionally it can push on and bloom again, so I didn't. But the one that bloomed is the tall one there with the remnants of the spike. But if you look next to it, the next new growth is pushing on now. So it started a new growth quite recently. That's Dendrobium Tetragonum variety giganteum. And we did actually see that in bloom a while ago. This has all the hallmarks of being grown on from a seedling because it's got some tiny little canes in amongst there. And gradually the canes have increased in size until the last one that fully matured and became a blooming sized plant. So actually there's a second new growth coming up in there as well. So in theory, from now on, each new growth as it matures should bloom. It's reached that size. Ugh. And down here, this never gets looked at because it's doing very little, apart from not dying. Oh, and the tags just fall on the floor, so I can't even tell you what it is. I'll have to pop up. This came from Alberto, and it's a true miniature. It is actually a dendrobium. It's got really thick, succulent leaves. It did grow a new root not that long ago, but it's just sitting there doing very little at the moment. The blooms on that for the size of the plant are enormous, but they're actually small, but it's just relative to the size of the plant. But yeah, I mean, that's how I got it. It hasn't done much since. We'll see what the growing season does for it. See if we can get that one going a bit. This one's not happy. Difficult to say why, although I can make some assumptions. This is Dendrobium fleckeri. It's an Australian one. And basically, as the canes mature, it forms a sheath between the two leaves. And then sits there for a while and then potentially blooms later. But this plant decided to push up. That cane that's sticking outwards with the yellow leaf on was out of the back of the plant straight into the mount. So at the wrong time of year, I unmounted it and turned it round. And it set that plant back quite a lot, quite dramatically. Most of the roots that it had decided to fail. Well, it has grown some new roots now. It is getting going again, and now it has a new growth. So hopefully it's going to pick up. But that has bloomed for me once, and not recently. It was some time ago. So it's not a happy bunny, that one. Likes to stay a bit cooler than a lot of dendrobiums, and I'll bear that in mind during this next growing season. Now, this little Orengis is a non-bloomer, the only one I've got, Orengis mystacidii, and it's several plants all attached basically, and it's growing well. It's got a smashing root system, and all I can do is hope that it'll reach proper blooming size this year. Pictures on the internet showing this in bloom are showing much larger plants than I've got. So although it's growing well and it's pushing on, I think when I got this it said near blooming size. Yeah, well, how near? Not that near apparently. But it's growing nicely. you know, it's got a good root system, good support system, it's nicely attached, so coming on, but a non-bloomer as yet. Those two are the newer Tolumnias. We looked at those a while ago. And this is Dendrobium moniliform variegata. And again, this was set back quite badly. I forget why. But nonetheless, it has pushed out quite a few new roots now, and it's starting to get a root system going on the back of the mount as well. The latest two growths are the tall ones, and they do have signs of some buds. So, but this one has in the past decided to do kikis instead of buds. But this time round, all of the little growths, all at the little nubbins that started to push out have actually turned into buds, not kikis. So it's obviously happier than it has been in the past. So very attractive little blooms, and an attractive plant. The canes do eventually become deciduous, but it's not like annually deciduous, but it does drop its leaves eventually. These two are last year's growths. They'll probably start thinking about dropping their leaves at the end of the next growing season. But nonetheless, it's bloomed, which is good. Hasn't actually bloomed for some time, so it's having a little go now. So that's that little row. Now I'll water them and then come on to something else. And this is one of the very few Phalaenopsis I've got. Was Cattleya Japonica, it's now Phalaenopsis Japonica. It's deciding to grow a spike. It wasn't happy in its pot. And again, difficult to say why, but I mounted it while it still had some reasonable roots. The idea being, if it doesn't work one way, let's try it a different way. And the only thing I have to completely bear in mind with this one is this is a cool grower. It's one of the very few Phalaenopsis that would prefer to stay cooler. So it gets kept quite low down in the grow room, and that'll have to be borne in mind once we head into the growing season and the temperatures start to climb. This will effectively go in with the Masdevallias in that area, where it can be constantly fanned to keep it cool. We'll see if it does better, but it's starting a spike, so should have some blooms on that soon. Well, I'm going to say in a while. Now, this is Dendrobium Kuniko, which is a primary cross effectively. I think it's Goldschmidtianum cross. Well, it's definitely one of the parents is Victoria Regina. If that imparts its cool growing requirement onto this primary cross, then it's a cool grower, but it'll depend on the other parent, and I'm hoping the combination of the two is more temperature tolerant than the true Victoria Regina. It's been in bloom for quite a while, but the blooms have gone now. Well, they certainly have now. But the interesting thing with this plant is the sheer amount of new growth it put on. I don't think I've ever seen a Victoria Regina with that much new growth on it, ever. And I've seen a lot. They don't seem to be vigorous, but this one is. And these canes haven't finished growing yet. Push these out part way through the growing season and they're still growing. And it's effectively doubled the size of the plant in the last growing season. It's also pushed out a good root system to go with those canes, so it's now an established plant on its mount. There's a lot of old canes on there, and some of them are starting to shrivel with age, which means I can probably trim them back to the base. I don't know what this is going to do now. The fact that it pushed out all those new growths last year, I'm hoping that when those growths are mature, they'll start to drop their leaves. Now that may not be until the end of this coming growing season, and until they drop their leaves it's unlikely to bloom. It might push an odd bloom out on those older canes, but the trouble is those canes were there when I got it, and I don't know how old they are. Some of those canes could be 4 or 5 years old and may just never bloom. They may have done in the past, but may never bloom again. The blooming cycle on this is going to be geared up to maturing the canes, getting their terminal leaf, coming into autumn, becoming deciduous, and then in the next growing season they'll probably bud on those leafless canes. So I may have quite a wait on that before that ever blooms again. But it's growing really well. Well pleased with the amount of growth that put on in a single season. Well pleased. If I could get a Victoria Regina to do that, I'd dance on the roof. Now the Dendrobium Hibiki is currently coming into a lot of growth. This is the one that's pushed on the best so far. That one started earlier than the others, but there's a couple of new growths in underneath, and a couple there. New growths on Hibiki don't always start right at the base. They can start part way up the cane, like that one to the right at the back. You could call that a kiki, I suppose, but in the truest sense, that's its nature. It does push up growths part way up from the base of the canes, sometimes, not always. It's growing well, and because I haven't had it long enough to tell exactly, this cane, which has still got leaves on, bloomed back in the summer, along with a lot of these stubby little ones, which is where most of the blooms came from. And the books and words say that this blooms on leafless canes. Well, the fact that it bloomed on that cane with leaves on disputes that straight away, which means, in theory, the rest of these canes down here, which are all roughly the same age and were on the plant when I got it, are liable to bloom in this coming season. But that's a guess, I don't know for sure. The new growths are highly unlikely to bloom until the following season, but these may well bloom this year. And if they do, then I'll have established the pattern of the way it grows, and I'll know for future reference. But blooms lasted an absolute age. It was an absolute stunner for most of the later growing season, and I hope to repeat it, but we'll have to wait and see. Now I'm showing Mr. Ugly here as an example of things that can go wrong with a Phalaenopsis that can try and put themselves right again. This is an incredibly unusual plant. It has got a name, but it's got Brontosaurus in it anyway. And although it's a hybrid, it's close to a species in as much as it's got a trait that it likes producing basal growths. Now some species just do that, and they can form quite a nice little bush, and they don't look like your normal Phalaenopsis, but some are that way inclined, and this is one of them. It's always had that trait. The crown rotted and the leaves fell out, and then it grew a new one. Ever seen that before? Because I haven't. So it's like pushed out a new basal growth from the centre of the crown. And then it decided to push out another one out the side, which is also growing some roots. It sure is a Mr. Ugly, but Mr. Ugly is also pushing out a flower spike. And the flower spike is coming off that tiny little basal growth. So work that lot out then. If it can go wrong, that plant's done it. I mean, it has got some reasonable roots in under here, and they are growing. So, it's got a bit of life in it, but boy does that look weird and ugly. Now, this other mounted Phalaenopsis, this hasn't got a name, just shows what can happen to a mounted plant. When it was mounted, it was pointing downwards, but then the latest two leaves have righted themselves and are facing up towards the light. Yeah, so it's got two upside down leaves and two up the right way. The old spike from quite a while ago I left on there because it looked like it was keeping its colour, and it is actually branching now, so it is going to extend. But it also has another spike coming on as well. This one's got some active roots. It's not a bad little mini Phalaenopsis, no ID obviously, but from memory this one has lovely soft yellow blooms with pink spots, and I think it's got a purpley sort of centre to it. So they're quite attractive blooms, not large, it's a mini Phalaenopsis, but anyway, we should see some soon. The spike is extending and showing its buds now, so coming on, and then those blooms will be followed by the extensions on the old spike, probably. So yeah, turned itself up the right way, all on its own. This is one of my mounted Miltonias, Queen Anne. This is coming on nicely. The two latest growths that grew and bloomed last year are now pushing out 2 growths each. This one's rocketing away. The one the other side is slow to move. But at the moment we've got quite cool temperatures. On the other side we've got that one pushing on quite nicely, and this one coming on behind. And this one coming on behind needs to be watched very, very carefully. Yeah? Now that's dry. There's no sign of wetness. I wonder if I can just got my thumbnail in under that. If I can look underneath. No, it's not gone through. So although that is some sort of infection and some sort of rot, it's sort of dried itself out. It's got over it. But I still need to watch it. There's a little sign there as well. And what about underneath? Yep. But they all appear to be on the surface bracts. Those are not leaves, those are just the bracts around the base that protect the growing shoot. And they'll just become those little bits at the base of the pseudobulb. So they're not terribly important. But nonetheless, if that had been wet, I might have had to consider taking that whole shoot off. But at the moment, I'm just going to keep my eye on it. And obviously keep water off of it. I mean, I'm about to water this, and I will have to go incredibly careful and make sure that shoot stays bone dry. No water at all. And now that I've lifted that brown piece off, that means air can get in underneath there. That'll dry it even faster. I'm not worried about it, I'm just being cautious. There's no sign of it on that growth. Now that one's still pushing on. This one's okay. So it's just that one. And looking at where it is, it's the lowest point on the plant. Now it's highly likely that in the past when I've been watering that some water has run down and just collected at that point. And sometimes that's all it can take. So I'll just keep my eye on it and make sure I keep it dry from now on. But the plant itself's coming on quite nicely. I expect that to bloom on all of these new growths. And the fact that they're all at different stages, it could be a staggered blooming, so it might actually be in bloom for a long time. That's Miltonia Queen Anne. Well, these are the 3 small Cattleyas that came out of the big box. They were lost in there. And one of them's got a... Yeah, I was just going to say, and one of them's got a very strange name. All I'm going to say about that lot, because some of the letters have faded, it's written in my notes okay, but it's got Cattleya Leopoldii in it, and as a consequence that's a young plant, because Leopoldii is a reasonable sized Cattleya and that isn't. Unless it's been crossed with a real miniature that's dwarfed it down, then that's a young plant. But it's producing a nice new growth at the moment. It's done some roots last year, so it's got a root system now, and it's just a matter of growing it on. Doesn't take up any room, so if that's 2 or 3 years from blooming size, so be it. But it is producing a nice new growth at the moment. That started recently on that one. That's that one. This one is Marychen crossed with, oh goodness knows what. I'm getting annoyed now. This is a Sharpie permanent marker, and it isn't. It's fading badly in a lot of places, so I reckon this was a cheap copy and not the real thing. Because my previous one, before it ran out, labels were written many years ago with that one, and they're still there, you know, whereas this is fading quickly. And it makes life difficult when I'm filming. You know, I know which plant this is and it's in my notes, but to read it out from a label with faded... Anyway, this one is... just produced that new growth, which is quite a bit bigger than the previous one. And again, it's difficult to say whether that's a young plant, whether it's getting up to maturity and it's a miniature. So it's just to grow it on. It's grown some roots, it's attached, and it's just grown a new growth and opened a new leaf. So, you know, that's all you can ask. And one day it'll bloom. That could be years away. It you know, might be the next growth. Who knows? This one we do, however, know. This one has bloomed. So it is blooming size, so it is a genuine miniature. And this is the little lemon drops crossed with the Cyclia spelt wrong, Vetulina. That was the one that had the orangey bloom that either faded to yellow or went the other way round. I can't remember whether it opened yellow and faded to orange, but it changed colour anyway. And it was in bloom for a very long time. And this is one of these that in the main is a bifoliate, but there is one growth on there with a single leaf. They just do that sometimes. But again, this one's just finished blooming. I've just taken the spike off recently, and it's already started its next new growth. And the fact that it's now blooming size, there's no reason why that next new growth shouldn't bloom. Now, it had a single bloom this time round. I wonder what it'll do when that new growth matures. Another single bloom, or maybe more than one. But I'll have to wait and see. So it's coming on. It's grown a lot of roots last year. It did well. It's attached. Roots going all round, even round the back now. So I mean, it's a nice plant. It's growing well, and a nice new growth coming on now. Now, this is one of the Cattleyas that came out of Big Box Junior, and this is Genmanii. Latest new growth has pushed on nicely, and from the area that new growth has come from, we now have a root system developing. So that one's going to take off quite nicely now. Didn't have very good roots on it, and like a lot of Cattleyas, you disturb old roots and they can fail. Basically, I won't say they always do, but they can, and this one did. So this one's been surviving with very little roots, but nonetheless it hasn't desiccated. It's hung in there. The bulbs are a little desiccated, but the leaves haven't died. That's the important thing. And now it's establishing a root system, so it'll get going now. I've got no more worries about it now. It'll just grow on. May or may not bloom on that latest growth. There's no sign of a sheath in there yet, but it's got enough support bulbs, and obviously this is a division. This has been cut off of a mature plant, so it's nearer to blooming size than if it was a maturing seedling. So it may bloom on that latest growth, but wait and see. But I'm just pleased it's now got a root system developing, because that's what it needed to get going. Now, this is Bulbophyllum sycamense, endearingly known as "Why won't you bloom?" Because it just hasn't. It's grown, it's doubled in size. I mean, there's no way that's not a mature plant. But I did do a bit of work on this one, and this is one of those that just grows. So it needs to be watered and fed continuously. There's no sort of rest or anything like that. It just keeps going, according to what I can find out. But the other thing I found out is it's high up the intermediate into the warm section. So it's not happy at the moment. Nonetheless, it's still decided to push up a new growth or two here and there. It's still growing, even though it's not warm. But I'm hoping that I'm going to keep this quite a lot warmer this year through the growing season, and see if that will trigger it into being happy and producing some blooms. I mean, it's grown really well, but so far, no blooms. We will see what we can do. I mean, I can't threaten it with the hedge, it's too good a plant. But I mean, after another growing season into next winter, if it still hasn't bloomed, I think somebody else may have to give it a go, because I just can't get it to bloom so far. And it's mature, you know. It's a mature adult plant capable of blooming. It just won't. So we'll see. And like I say, if you keep doing the same thing and something won't bloom, it's unlikely to. So what I'm changing is its temperature. I'm just going to try and keep it quite a bit warmer. It'll just get put in a place that gets more heat than it has done in the past, and see if that will kick it off. And this little Dendrobium, without going to my notes, I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure this one came from Alberto. And it did have one long cane with two kikis, and that long cane started to rot, and it was moving quite quickly. So I took the two kikis off and planted those separately to get them away from that cane. The cane eventually got cut off. The older part of the plant is totally desiccated, but the two kikis are okay, and they have got some little roots going on in there. So hopefully when we get into the growing season, those two kikis will start to grow. Well, they themselves won't grow. They've got no growing point. But from the base of those kikis should be some new growths which will produce new canes. And that's Dendrobium tortilli. I think that's how it's pronounced. or tortilli, I think it's probably pronounced. So one to grow on and quite a long way off of blooming, but managed to save it. That's the good thing, because that if those kikis had stayed on that rotting cane, they'd have probably gone down as well. So I've managed to save it, and hopefully it will grow on in the next growing season. This is my other mounted Miltonia. This is Cattleya, and this is just coming back into growth now. And with those new growths are associated new roots. This new growth has its new roots pushing on quite well. Some are even going up the back of the mount now, and this new growth's just started along with new roots. So that'll push on nicely as we get into the growing season, and it should mature those growths and bloom. It did bloom last summer. I can't remember. I think it actually only bloomed on one of the latest growths, not both. Strange actually, the two latest growths, the mature ones, this one is quite large and bloomed. That one was not quite so large and didn't bloom. The smaller one is pushing up a much more vigorous new growth than the larger one. It's doing opposites, so who knows? It may swap sides and bloom the other side this year, but hopefully it'll bloom on both of those new growths. Very attractive blooms. The last one for today is Mr. Hairy, Dendrobium Cinelli. I'm hoping to get some blooms on this, but it's at the wrong stage to do some sort of mass blooming, because most of the canes that you're looking at have got leaves on and they're last year's growths, and they haven't even made an effort to drop their leaves yet. And this mainly blooms on leafless canes, you know, the ones that drop their leaves as it goes into autumn, like these over here. So we may get a smattering of blooms over in this corner of the plant. But nonetheless, the new growths on this are pushing on, and there are several. There's one coming out at the base there. There's another one coming out at the base there. That's a new growth to the base of that particular cane. And there's another one tucked in there. And that is the sole reason why I didn't attempt to give this any form of rest. If it wants to push out new growths, I'm not going to starve them. I want them to grow. The bigger and stronger this plant gets, the more chance I've got of giving it what I'll call a semi-rest, because I don't believe this one needs the full treatment. But you know, I don't think I'm going to get a mass blooming this spring, but I'm really hoping for one the following spring. But hopefully we'll get some blooms at the right time, which is not now. No sign of any buds or anything yet, it's too early. This one blooms a little later than quite a few of the dendrobiums, or it does here in the UK anyway. Anyway, it's growing on nicely. Yeah, I'm pleased. But I'll be happy with just a smattering of blooms this time round, and then the following spring, as I said, I think it will really come into its own. So a little bit of a wait maybe, but hopefully a few blooms. And that's it for today, so I'll see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.